The desert wind carried dust and sorrow through the streets of Copper Ridge, a small frontier town where justice was as scarce as water in summer. Sarah McKenzie stood at her late husband's grave, her black dress fluttering like a wounded crow against the relentless sun. 3 months had passed since Thomas McKenzie was found shot dead in the trail to Silver Creek, and still no one dared speak the truth everyone knew. "Time's up, widow," came a gravelly voice behind her. Sarah didn't need to turn around to know it was Ezra Blackwood, the man who owned half the town and coveted the other half. His boots crunched on the dry earth as he approached, each step a reminder of the power he wielded like a weapon. "I said I needed time to mourn," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She finally turned to face him, her green eyes blazing with a fire that even 3 months of grief couldn't extinguish. Blackwood's thin lips curved into what he probably thought was a smile. "Mourning don't pay debts, Mrs. McKenzie. Your husband owed me considerable money, and now that debt falls to you. I'm being generous, offering marriage instead of foreclosure." The truth hung unspoken between them like smoke from a gunfight. Everyone in Copper Ridge knew Thomas McKenzie had been getting too close to proving Blackwood's cattle rustling operation. Everyone knew who had really pulled that trigger on the Silver Creek Trail. But knowing and proving were two different things in a town where the sheriff wore Blackwood's brand. "I won't marry my husband's killer," Sarah said quietly, the words dropping like stones into still water. Blackwood's eyes darkened. "Careful with them accusations, widow. Might find yourself joining your husband sooner than expected." He stepped closer, and Sarah caught the scent of whiskey and violence that always surrounded him. "You got 3 days to decide. Marriage or foreclosure. Choose wisely." As Blackwood's boots faded into the distance, Sarah felt the weight of impossible choices crushing down on her shoulders. The small ranch Thomas had built with his own hands would be lost, along with everything they dreamed of together. But worse than losing her home was the thought of belonging to the man who'd stolen her future. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the valley, Sarah sat on her porch steps watching the sun die behind the mountains. The isolation she'd grown to love now felt like a noose tightening around her neck. Her nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and even if they wanted to help, Blackwood's influence reached everywhere. A rider appeared on the horizon, a dark silhouette against the crimson sky. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to the rifle beside her door. Visitors after sunset rarely brought good news. But as the horseman drew closer, she noticed something different about his posture. No hurry, no aggression, just a weary man at the end of a long day. The stranger stopped at her gate, touching the brim of his weathered hat. "Evening, ma'am. Name's Jake Sullivan. My horse threw a shoe about a mile back. Wonder if I might water him and maybe fix that shoe? I can pay for the trouble." Even in the fading light, Sarah could see the honesty in his weathered face. He was tall and lean, with a kind of quiet strength that came from years of hard work rather than intimidation. His clothes were worn but clean, and his horse, a sturdy bay mare, showed signs of careful tending. "There's water in the trough by the barn," Sarah said, surprising herself by standing up. "I think my late husband's tools are still in the shed." "Much obliged." Jake dismounted and led his horse toward the water, moving with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Beautiful land you got here. Your husband had a good eye for it." The past tense told Sarah he'd somehow heard about Thomas, probably in town. But unlike the curious stares and whispered conversations she'd endured for months, Jake's acknowledgement felt respectful, even comforting. As Jake worked on his horse's shoe, Sarah found herself watching from the porch. There was something calming about his methodical movements, the gentle way he spoke to his mare. It had been so long since she felt safe around a man who wasn't Thomas. "You traveling far?" she asked when he finished. Jake straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Looking for a place to settle down, actually. Been drifting too long." He glanced around the ranch with genuine appreciation. "This valley's got good grass, decent water. Man could build something here if he was of a mind to." "Most of the good land's already taken," Sarah said carefully, "or controlled by folks who don't welcome newcomers." Something in her tone made Jake look at her more closely. In the lamplight spilling from her windows, he could see the strain around her eyes, the defensive set of her shoulders. "Sounds like there might be trouble in paradise." Sarah hesitated. 3 months of carrying this burden alone had nearly broken her, but something about this quiet stranger made her want to trust again. There's a man named Blackwood who thinks he owns this town. He's been pressuring me to marry him. And you'd rather not, Jake said. It wasn't a question. I'd rather die first. The words came out with more vehemence than Sarah intended, but Jake just nodded as if her answer made perfect sense. Blackwood, he repeated thoughtfully. Big man with fancy clothes and cold eyes? You know him. Ran into him in town earlier. Didn't much like what I saw. Jake secured his tools and swung back into the saddle. Mrs. McKenzie. Sarah McKenzie. Mrs. McKenzie, I thank you for your kindness tonight. If you don't mind me saying, you might want to consider that there are still decent folks in this world. Don't let one bad apple spoil your faith in the whole barrel. As Jake rode away into the darkness, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months, hope. She didn't know who this Jake Sullivan was or what brought him to Copper Ridge, but for the first time since Thomas died, she felt like she might not be completely alone. What she didn't know was that Jake Sullivan had his own reasons for being interested in Ezra Blackwood. And tomorrow would bring revelations that would change everything for both of them. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating Western stories. Hit that notification bell to stay updated on Sarah's journey and discover what secrets Jake Sullivan carries with him into Copper Ridge. Dawn broke over Copper Ridge like a gunshot, sharp and unforgiving. Sarah had barely slept, Jake Sullivan's words echoing in her mind. Don't let one bad apple spoil your faith in the whole barrel. But as she watched Blackwood's men riding toward her ranch, faith felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Mrs. McKenzie. Sheriff Coleman called out, though everyone knew he was Blackwood's lapdog in a badge. Got some papers for you to sign. Sarah stepped onto her porch, the rifle cradled in her arms. I told Blackwood I needed 3 days. That was yesterday, ma'am. Today's a new day, and Mr. Blackwood's feeling generous. Sign these papers agreeing to the marriage, and your troubles are over. Behind Coleman, 3 of Blackwood's hired guns sat their horses with casual menace. Sarah recognized them all, drifters and killers who'd found steady work under Blackwood's protection. The kind of men who'd shoot a widow without losing sleep. And if I refuse? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Then we'll be back tomorrow to discuss foreclosure, Coleman said with mock sympathy. Shame to see a lady lose everything over stubborn pride. As the men rode away, Sarah felt the walls closing in. She was trapped between certain ruin and a living nightmare, with no allies in sight. That's when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats, different from before, steadier and somehow reassuring. Jake Sullivan rode up with the morning sun at his back, looking like something from her prayers. Morning, Mrs. McKenzie. Couldn't help but notice you had visitors. Nothing I can't handle, Sarah lied, but her voice betrayed her fear. Jake dismounted and studied the ground where Coleman's horses had stood. 5 riders, armed men by the depth of the prints. He looked up at her with knowing eyes. Pressure getting worse? Something in his tone made Sarah lower her guard. Blackwood sent the sheriff with marriage papers. Says I've got until tomorrow to decide. That's not much time, Jake said quietly. He was studying her ranch with the eye of a man who understood both land and trouble. Mind if I ask what kind of debt your husband owed? $5,000, supposedly. Thomas never mentioned any debt to me. Sarah's voice grew bitter. Funny how it only appeared after he was killed. Jake nodded grimly. I've seen this game before. Create a debt, eliminate the debtor, collect from the widow. He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Mrs. McKenzie, what if I told you that debt might not be legal? Hope flared in Sarah's chest. What do you mean? In town yesterday, I heard interesting talk about your husband. Seems he was investigating some missing cattle before he died. The kind of investigation that might have uncovered certain illegal activities. Sarah's heart pounded. You think Thomas found something? I think your husband was an honest man who got too close to the truth. And I think Blackwood's rushing this marriage because he's afraid. Jake stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I also think you might have allies you don't know about. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Jake touched his hat brim. I'll be in town today asking some questions. If anyone comes calling, you tell them you're considering all your options. Buy us some time. Us? Sarah called after him, but Jake was already riding away, leaving her with more questions than answers. and something she'd forgotten how to feel hope. That afternoon, Sarah discovered what Jake meant about unknown allies. Doc Henderson, the town's elderly physician, arrived with his medical bag and an unexpected message. "Your husband came to see me a week before he died," Doc said quietly, glancing around nervously. "He was worried about someone trying to hurt you. Asked me to give you this if anything happened to him." With trembling hands, Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was a map of the valley with several locations marked in Thomas's careful handwriting. At the bottom, a note, "Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone." The marked spots show where Blackwood's been rebranding stolen cattle. "Take this to Judge Morrison in Silver Creek. He's honest. Trust no one in Copper Ridge except Doc Henderson. I love you always. Thomas." "Judge Morrison," Sarah whispered. Doc nodded. "Federal judge, not local. Blackwood's got no influence there. But Silver Creek's a hard day's ride, and Blackwood's got men watching all the roads." Sarah stared at the map, understanding dawning. This was why Thomas died. This was why Blackwood was so desperate to marry her, not for love or even lust, but to legally claim the ranch and destroy any evidence Thomas might have hidden. "Doc, who is Jake Sullivan?" she asked suddenly. The old man's eyes sharpened. "Why do you ask? He seems to know more about this situation than a simple drifter should." The plan was dangerous, but it was their only chance. Sarah would pretend to agree to Blackwood's demands while Jake and Judge Morrison gathered the evidence they needed. Everything depended on Sarah's ability to convince Blackwood she'd given up the fight. The next morning, Sarah rode into town wearing her best dress and a defeated expression. Word spread quickly. The McKenzie widow was finally ready to surrender. Blackwood was waiting in his saloon, surrounded by his usual collection of hired guns and corrupt officials. His smile was triumphant and cruel as Sarah approached his table. "Mrs. McKenzie, I knew you'd come to your senses eventually." "I don't have a choice," Sarah said, injecting just the right amount of bitterness into her voice. "I can't fight the whole town." "Smart woman. We'll have the ceremony this afternoon. Judge Patterson's already been informed." Blackwood's laugh sent chills down Sarah's spine. "I have one condition," Sarah said quickly. "I want to spend this morning at the ranch, packing my personal things. Some of them belong to my mother." Blackwood's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You trying to run, widow? Where would I go? You control every road out of town." Sarah let her shoulders slump in defeat. "I just want a few hours to say goodbye to the life I had." After a tense moment, Blackwood nodded. "One of my boys will escort you. Can't have my future bride getting lost." 2 hours later, Sarah rode back to her ranch with one of Blackwood's men trailing behind. But what the guard didn't know was that Jake and Judge Morrison were already hidden in her barn, and Sarah carried Thomas's evidence sewn into the lining of her coat. The evidence was even more damning than they'd hoped. Thomas had discovered not just cattle rustling and land fraud, but a network of corruption involving officials in 3 states. Account books, forged documents, maps of illegal claims, everything needed to destroy Blackwood's empire. "This is enough to put him away for life," Judge Morrison said, examining the papers. "But we need to get this to Silver Creek safely. Blackwood's expecting me back in town for the wedding in 2 hours," Sarah said. "If I don't show up, he'll come looking," Jake finished. "And he'll bring an army." They all knew the truth. There was no way to get Judge Morrison and the evidence out of town without a fight. Blackwood had too many men, too much control. But Jake had one more card to play. "Judge, how long do you need to make copies of the most important documents?" 30 minutes, maybe less." Jake checked his weapons grimly. "Then that's how long we've got to keep them busy." Sarah grabbed his arm. "You can't face all of Blackwood's men alone." "Won't be alone." Jake's smile was wolf-like. "Remember what Doc said about the right man showing up at the right time? Well, I sent word to some friend yesterday." As if summoned by his words, riders appeared on the horizon. 6 men wearing federal marshal badges, riding hard toward the ranch. Judge Morrison smiled with satisfaction. "Mrs. McKenzie, it seems your troubles are about to end." But Blackwood wasn't going down without a fight. As the federal marshals took positions around the ranch, Sarah could see dust clouds on all the roads leading to her property. Blackwood was coming with everything he had. The battle was brief but fierce. Blackwood's hired guns were tough, but they were criminals, not soldiers. The federal marshals were professionals who'd been hunting men like this for years. Within an hour, it was over. Blackwood himself tried to escape during the chaos, but Jake was waiting for him at the back of the property. The confrontation was personal. Blackwood had killed too many good men like Thomas McKenzie. "You're under arrest for murder, cattle rustling, land fraud, and conspiracy," Jake said, his gun steady. Blackwood snarled like a cornered animal. "You think this ends anything? I own half the territory. Men like me don't stay in jail." "Men like you don't usually face federal judges," Jake replied calmly. "And they don't usually leave behind evidence like you did." As the sun set over Copper Ridge, Sarah stood on her porch watching the last of Blackwood's men being led away in chains. The nightmare was finally over. Her ranch was safe, her husband's killer would face justice, and the corruption that had strangled the town for years was exposed. Judge Morrison approached with the official papers declaring Sarah's debt null and void. "You're a free woman, Mrs. McKenzie. Your ranch is legally yours, free and clear." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now the town gets a chance to heal. New sheriff, honest officials, and a future built on law instead of fear." As Judge Morrison and the other marshals prepared to leave for Silver Creek with their prisoners, Jake lingered behind. He'd taken off his badge, and Sarah noticed he was studying her ranch again with that same appreciative eye. "You mentioned yesterday that you were looking for a place to settle down," Sarah said carefully. Jake smiled, the first genuinely warm smile she'd seen from him. "I did say that. This valley's got good grass, decent water. A man could build something here if he was of a mind to. Or help rebuild what's already here," Sarah suggested, her heart racing. "That too." Jake stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Mrs. McKenzie, Sarah, I know it's too soon to talk about the future. You've got healing to do and decisions to make. But when you're ready, well, this valley's big enough for two people who aren't afraid of hard work." Sarah felt tears of relief and hope streaming down her face. "I think I'd like that, Marshal Sullivan. I think I'd like that very much." As Jake rode away into the sunset, he called back, "I'll be staying at Doc Henderson's for a few days, helping with the transition. No rush on that decision, but I'm hoping you'll let me know." Sarah stood on her porch until Jake disappeared over the ridge, then turned to look at her home, truly hers now, safe and free. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time since Thomas died, she was looking forward to facing them. The widow of Copper Ridge had found her courage, her justice, and maybe, just maybe, her future. Thank you for following Sarah's incredible journey. Subscribe to our channel for more thrilling Western adventures, tales of courage, love, and justice in the American frontier. Don't miss our next story.